Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
The woman carried the entire household and her loser husband on her back, while her mother-in-law only criticized her and then decided to take advantage of her daughter-in-law herself. But one day, the young woman came home from work earlier than usual and was stunned. "As you wish, Carmen, but something needs to be done about this," were the words with which her neighbor Rosa greeted her the moment the young woman returned home from work. "My head's been splitting all day, and your husband, by the way, hasn't even opened the door. I called him, knocked, even banged on the wall. How long is this going to go on? Do you understand you live among people, not in the wilderness? I'm warning you, if the same mess happens tomorrow, I'm calling the police." "My husband is an adult," Carmen said wearily, feeling a deep sense of helplessness rising inside her. "I can't tell him what to do, especially when I'm at work. So please, take it up with him." "I'll take it up with the police," Rosa shook her withered fist, "because this is crossing all lines. Or better yet, I'll call Hacienda and report that you're renting a place and not paying taxes." "The owner of the apartment is the one who should pay taxes," Carmen retorted tiredly. Her head was already pounding from lack of sleep and endless overtime, and now she had to argue with neighbors instead of finally getting home. "I don't care who's supposed to pay taxes," Rosa snapped, discarding any remaining politeness. "You'll be out of here like a cork from a cava bottle. So take action. This is your final warning. You're adults, you should know better." "Of course we should," Carmen muttered, shaking her head as she rummaged through the bottomless pocket of her bag for the keys. As usual, the lining had torn, and the keys had slipped underneath it. Not wanting to wrestle with the unruly bag, and knowing her husband was at home, Carmen rang the doorbell. But alas, there was no response. It figured, the sound of something could be heard even through the metal door. Most likely Nicholas couldn't hear the bell over the noise. She had to put the heavy grocery bag down on the hallway floor and dig out the keys after all. Carmen stepped over the threshold to the blaring sounds of a computer shooter game. The speakers were blasting at full volume. No wonder Rosa had gone ballistic. Still wearing her shoes, the young woman walked down the hallway, entered the bedroom, where her husband was blissfully gaming, and yanked the plug from the socket in one swift motion. "Hey, what are you doing?" Nicholas was outraged. "What the hell's your problem? You just got back from work and you're already picking a fight and throwing a tantrum?" "From work?" Carmen shouted. "Exactly, dear, I came back from work. And what have you earned today? Or yesterday? When was the last time you even had a job? You're at it again." Nicholas clutched his unkempt, greasy hair and stormed out of the room. "Mom was right, you were bound to start rubbing it in my face. Here she is, the great workaholic. Of course, you're the breadwinner now, you work and earn money, and I'm just dirt under your feet, under your glorious high heel." "Dirt underfoot," Carmen repeated, sitting down on the edge of the couch. Only now did she realize she needed to take off her shoes, put them away, and head to the kitchen, since the fridge was surely empty. Nicholas and Carmen had been married for nearly 4 years, and only half that time could Carmen remotely consider herself happy. Right after the wedding, the newlyweds had rented their own place and started enjoying life. They both worked, made time for each other, had plans and dreams. In short, they lived like a typical young couple. Then Nicholas lost his job. He had clashed with the new department heads, who expected him to actually do work instead of just showing off. "That company didn't deserve me," Nicholas said as he sailed into self-employment. "I'll find 10 more like it. I'll go through them like breakfast, lunch, and dinner, they'll be lining up to hire me. And that idiot of a manager will soon realize he let go of the best employee." Carmen didn't know whether the manager ever realized anything, but she certainly did. From now on, supporting the household would fall entirely on her shoulders. And that was a heavy burden for a young professional. Carmen now had to work much harder and longer, and all her earnings went toward rent and food. There was no money left for fun, travel, or even small indulgences. Living off one salary was tough. At first, Carmen hoped her husband would soon come to his senses and find another job. After all, could a man really afford to just sit around after quitting on a whim? There were plenty of vacancies, even if not perfectly aligned with his specialty. Still, someone had to support the family and get on with life. But Nicholas decided that playing the role of a misunderstood genius and victim of circumstance was exactly what he needed. None of the jobs he considered matched his status. "I'm a free agent," Nicholas proclaimed, "and they want me to follow a dress code and show up at 8 in the morning. And overtime? They want me to work overtime. But they're offering to pay for that," Carmen pointed out reasonably. "So it's not the worst job in the world." "You've never understood me," Nicholas exclaimed, glaring at her. "If it were up to you, you'd have me passing out flyers just so I'd bring home a paycheck. You don't care at all about my self-realization. You think it's okay to do any job as long as you, our great princess, don't have to overexert yourself. It's disgusting, Carmen." Carmen didn't think her position was disgusting. It was easy to reason like that if you had a secure roof over your head paid for by someone else's salary, and if someone put a plate of hot food in front of you every day. Nicholas himself, despite being at home all day long, didn't bother doing any housework. He simply idled away his time, blasting music at full volume, playing computer shooters, and chatting online with other slackers. Carmen, on the other hand, had to take extra shifts just to make ends meet. She had already worked full-time before, but now she was working nearly double shifts, with no days off, no weekends. And when she came home to a cluttered apartment filled with greasy takeout boxes, she still had to tidy up and cook a proper meal. Still, Carmen was convinced that if she were the only influence in Nicholas's life, she would have long ago managed to persuade him to get a job. But her husband believed himself to be a unique talent, an unrecognized genius, because that's what his mother had convinced him he was. And ever since Carmen had started urging her husband to find work, her mother-in-law had become her worst enemy. She and Isabel had disliked each other from the first glance. Sometimes you just look at someone and think, not my kind of person. Isabel hadn't liked a single thing about her future daughter-in-law, not the fact that Carmen didn't have her own apartment, not her modest family background, not her ordinary office job, and certainly not her lack of ambition. Isabel had raised her son alone and believed him to be an incredible prize for any woman, even though he himself didn't have property or a well-paying job. That didn't bother her in the slightest. In our day, Isabel would say, pursing her already thin lips, women chased men, not the other way around. And Nicholas is a very popular man, I'll have you know. Girls have been after him since high school, and what girls? Not like you, little runt. And now he's decided to marry a penniless girl. But your son doesn't have anything either, Carmen replied as calmly as she could to her future mother-in-law. That's completely irrelevant, Isabel said with a straight face. A woman gives birth to children and stays home. You can't pry her out later. 1 minute the child is sick, then it's school, then kindergarten, then she pops out another one and dumps it on my son. And Nicholas will be the one working, building a career, and earning everything for himself. So remember what a prize you've landed. You should cherish and pamper your husband. And looking Carmen straight in the eye, seeing she clearly didn't agree, Isabel added with venom. It's shameful for a woman to be unmarried. It means no one wants her. But for a man to be single, that's not only normal, it's even respectable. No one will throw a stone at him for not being married. So marriage benefits you, sweetheart. Carmen simply loved Nicholas. She hadn't given much thought to such lofty concepts. She just wanted them to be happy, to eventually have kids, take out a mortgage for a small apartment, and go on a vacation together once a year. Simple, everyday dreams. But Nicholas's prolonged unemployment hit them hard. Whenever Carmen tried to reason with him, to explain they were in no position financially and that he could at least start as a career or entry-level employee, Nicholas would fly into a rage and immediately call his mother. In Isabel, he always found support and reinforcement of the idea that he was unique, irreplaceable, and that women should be fighting over him. What, that chicken of yours can't even earn enough to feed you? Isabel would shout over the phone loud enough for Carmen to hear. Are you starving? Then come to me, son. I'll give you a real dinner if your wife, your life partner, is too stingy to serve you a bowl of soup. See? Nicholas would say, dramatically holding up the phone. Mom says I should come to her for food if you're too cheap to feed me. This is outrageous. But I'm not stingy. Carmen tried to defend herself. I just can't stretch my income to cover food, rent, clothes, and shoes. These days, both partners have to work, Nicholas. I will find a job, her husband would reply confidently, chin raised. And then you'll see, soon you'll envy me. I'll be successful, young, and good-looking. Just look at yourself, Carmen, you can't even look in the mirror without wanting to cry. Carmen had to admit he had a point, at least partially. She had indeed let herself go, simply because she didn't have the time or money for self-care. She hadn't been to a hair salon in ages. She couldn't remember the last time she'd had a manicure. Her wardrobe hadn't seen anything new in a long while. Meanwhile, Nicholas received new clothes from his mother almost every month. Isabel still worked and could afford to spoil her son with expensive gifts. But Carmen couldn't even imagine spending her hard-earned wages on such indulgences. If she ever did, they wouldn't have anything to eat the next day. And Isabel didn't limit herself to just the financial criticisms, she gladly picked on Carmen for anything remotely worthy of reproach. In her view, Carmen didn't earn enough, didn't spend enough time with the family, talked too much, and demanded too much from her son. Worst of all, Carmen refused to accept what Isabel believed to be an eternal truth, that the mother is the most important woman in a man's life. Why are you all over him again? Where did you grow up, some kind of forest? Where did you learn such manners? That's the sort of thing Isabel would say if Carmen so much as touched her husband in front of her. How many times do I have to tell you to behave properly? And then the mother would turn to Nicholas, and you, can't you put your wife in her place? I've told you over and over, there are plenty of women out there, but you'll only ever have one mother. And only your mother wants you to be truly happy. Your wife is jealous of you, she sneers behind your back, while your mom sincerely wants the best for you, Nicholas. So enough cuddling up to her, you need to be tougher with your wife. Carmen had tried everything to get through to her husband. She cried, begged, pleaded, and even once threatened to pack her things and leave. Then go, Nicholas replied, seemingly indifferent. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. I can find 100 Carmens like you. But Carmen didn't dare leave. She'd prepared herself to walk out 100 times, dreamed of escaping into the great elsewhere, but every time something pulled her back into a marriage that was familiar and predictable, even if it had absolutely nothing to do with happiness. Lately, Nicholas had really let himself go. He wasn't even pretending to look for a job anymore. He simply said that when the time was right, the perfect opportunity would come to him, and only then would he go back to work. For now, he needed to find himself and rest. And besides, why was his wife always pestering him when he wasn't in the right headspace? Apparently, Nicholas had decided to seek his inspiration and inner resources through blasting music and constant computer gaming. That's why the neighbors complained. Carmen felt incredibly embarrassed in front of the elderly residents, but what could she do? She spent all her time at work, and Nicholas was an adult. He should know better. Another argument had left Carmen so drained she could barely feel her legs. And to make things worse, she'd taken work home that evening, hoping to earn the end-of-month bonus her boss had promised. She'd brought back several folders. She couldn't imagine how she'd find the strength to go through them. She rubbed her forehead and thought about taking something for her headache. Nicholas had spent the entire day lounging on the couch playing computer games. He didn't have to worry about shouldering a household or a lazy husband. Carmen was so furious she felt like marching into his room, laying out every grievance, and ending this miserable relationship once and for all. With tears welling up from exhaustion and despair, Carmen made her way to the bedroom, determined to finally say what she had to, when she heard her husband talking on the phone. There was no mistaking the voice, it was Nicholas, chatting with his mother. She made some kind of slop again, totally inedible, he was whining. Mom, can I come have dinner at your place tonight? She flew in like a fury, nearly broke my computer. I'm coming to you. Of course, Carmen thought bitterly. Perfect way to solve your problems at 30, run straight to mommy. But where could she run? Who would make dinner? Who would pay the rent? All of Carmen's fire seemed to vanish. She wiped away a few tears and quietly retreated to the kitchen, careful not to let her husband realize she'd overheard the call. Nicholas didn't even say goodbye. He just got dressed and left for his mother's, slamming the door behind him. Carmen knew from experience he wouldn't be back until late. He and Isabel would spend the evening ripping her to shreds, and his mother would once again fill his head with ideas about how exceptional and irreplaceable he was. And all Carmen could do was continue tidying the apartment, which only Nicholas ever messed up, and cook meals, because, if not today, then tomorrow he'd want to eat something. She decided to make use of the quiet to get some work done and laid out the folders on the table. But her thoughts kept drifting to what was going on in her mother-in-law's apartment. She had no doubt Isabel was poisoning Nicholas's mind, calling his wife a failure, a rude, narrow-minded girl. Nicholas never defended Carmen to his mother. On the contrary, he always asked her to keep quiet and avoid arguments. She's lived a long life and knows better, he always said. And remember, I married you because I love you. So listen to my mother and try to be better. As Carmen had expected, Nicholas came home very late, undressed, and collapsed on the couch under a blanket. He had neither the desire nor the capacity to talk to his wife, listen to her concerns, or even just kiss her. Nicholas, Carmen began, trying to start a difficult conversation. We're not living like a married couple. We're like strangers, don't you see? What do I care how you live, he muttered from under the blanket. Just leave me alone and let me sleep. But I want to talk. I need to talk, Carmen insisted, determined to finally address what was happening. What do you want from me? Why are you always on my back? Mom was right, you just see me as a resource. You don't care about me as a person. Oh, really? Who's using whom here? Carmen asked with no real hope for an answer. Nicholas, tell me, do you even love me? Silence. Several long seconds passed, long enough for Carmen to imagine all sorts of terrible things. Finally, as if out of pity, Nicholas mumbled under his breath. Yeah, I love you. Just let me sleep. It wasn't the answer Carmen had hoped for, but it was better than nothing. At least tonight Isabel hadn't managed to fully turn Nicholas against her. Which meant there was still some time, however short, left for a bit of peace. Listen, I don't get it. Why are you holding on to him? Asked her cousin Margarita, reaching for her burger. The two women worked in neighboring departments, and during their lunch break they had rushed to a small cafeteria, trying to cram in conversation, food, and a cheap coffee all within the remaining 15 minutes. How can I not? Carmen replied, answering a question with a question, though she knew exactly what Margarita meant. He's my husband. You have to stand by your husband. Your husband? Any husband? Margarita snorted and took a bite of her burger. Honestly, in your household, you're the man. You're the breadwinner. You make the rules. It's Nicholas who should be afraid of losing you. Deep down, Carmen completely agreed with her cousin, but she couldn't say it aloud. So she simply shrugged and took a sip of her coffee. Look, Carmen, Margarita said firmly, if you don't put a stop to this now, they'll never get off your back. I don't think your parents raised you and gave you an education just so this pair could ride you into the ground. Nicholas isn't a freeloader, Carmen protested, trying to defend her husband. Really? And what would you call a man who hasn't worked for 2 years and won't even lift a finger around the house? Margarita grinned, clearly only getting warmed up. Although, to be fair, I was talking about his lovely mother. What I don't understand is why she's so determined to drive a wedge between you two. It's not like there's a line of young, long-legged millionaire daughters lining up to take Nicholas off your hands. Who'd want to drag around that treasure who refuses to work but expects gourmet meals? Once again, Carmen had to silently agree with Margarita. So here's what you're gonna do, sweetie. Margarita slapped her palm on the table for emphasis. Starting today, you begin putting that old witch in her place. If she starts lecturing you or nagging in your ear, hit her back with a sharp, classy comeback. And then Nicholas will give me 100 comebacks of his own, Carmen muttered, and none of them will be classy. If he dares to mouth off once, just leave the fridge empty for a week, Margarita advised. A full stomach doesn't like to listen, but let him go hungry for a few days and he'll become the very picture of politeness. Though hey, do what you think is best. You're an independent, capable girl. Just then, Carmen's phone rang with its most irritating ringtone, and she rolled her eyes. That old leech could feel the moment to pounce, Carmen thought bitterly. What did her mother-in-law want this time, in the middle of a workday? Why did she always call her at work? Fighting the urge to switch off her phone and toss it into a ditch, Carmen reluctantly answered. She listened for a few moments, visibly stunned, while Margarita watched her intently. Then Carmen hung up and looked at her cousin. It was the paramedic using my mother-in-law's phone. They're taking her to Hospital General to be admitted. Someone from the family needs to go over, lock up the apartment, and then bring her some things to the hospital. Well then call Nicholas, Margarita said brightly. He's home anyway. Let him run over to his beloved mommy. They adore each other so much, he should be thrilled to help her in her time of need. Carmen, however, wasn't so sure. Her husband didn't exactly leap at the chance to care for others. And it was strange that Isabel had called her and not her own son. But Carmen didn't have time to dwell on it. She quickly called Nicholas and asked him to stop by his mother's apartment, then head to the hospital with whatever she needed. The moment Nicholas heard something had happened to his mother, he jumped into action and said he'd go straight over. Relieved that, for once, this task wasn't falling on her shoulders, Carmen turned to Margarita. Why do you look so pleased? Her cousin asked. Do you even realize what just happened? What do you mean? Carmen asked, her lips pale. I mean, Margarita clarified, that your mother-in-law is about to become your burden. Nicholas certainly won't be the one changing diapers or making soup from scratch. And secondly, when will you finally understand that you don't have to jump in and fix everyone else's problems? Look what just happened. Your mother-in-law called you, not her jobless son who sits home all day, but you, Carmen, who's practically steaming from stress. Carmen wanted to protest, but then realized her cousin was absolutely right. Right about everything. That she would be the one taking care of Isabel. That no one else in her husband's family would even consider another arrangement. My advice, Margarita said as the two women hurried back toward the office, is to start drawing boundaries now, because if you don't, they'll grind you into the ground. And the end will still be the same, you'll leave Nicholas. But not before they've drained you emotionally to the point of collapse. The rest of the workday, Carmen couldn't stop thinking about her cousin's words. And she finally came to a conclusion: she really did need to start distancing herself. And, thankfully, a perfect excuse had just presented itself. Maybe she wouldn't have had the courage to take that step on her own, but now fate had handed her an opportunity to avoid an outcome she could no longer deny was inevitable. At the morning briefing, the department head asked who could take a short business trip for a few days to a neighboring city. While her colleagues hesitated, weighing whether it was worth the hassle, Carmen raised her hand and said confidently, I can go, if you're considering me. She was immediately assured that they'd be happy to send her and was instructed to report to the secretary to prepare the necessary paperwork. Now came the harder part, talking to Nicholas and explaining the situation. That was always tricky. Over the years of their happy marriage, Nicholas had grown completely unaccustomed to making decisions. It seemed like he believed groceries magically appeared on the shelves and the laundry washed itself at the wave of a wand. Because as soon as Carmen stepped through the door, Nicholas pounced on her with accusations. Where the hell have you been? He demanded with a scowl. I've been back from the hospital for ages and I've been waiting for you. Carmen sighed, once, then again, bracing herself for the usual round of complaints. And why are you waiting for me? She asked, trying to stay calm as she walked into the kitchen and lit the stove. I was starving. So I'm making dumplings. Do you realize how badly you set me up? Carmen nearly choked on the orange juice she was drinking straight from the carton. Excuse me, she asked, wondering if she'd misunderstood. He couldn't possibly be that oblivious. You set me up. Nicholas whined hysterically. First of all, Mom asked the doctor to call you because she was counting on your help as a woman, and instead, you sent me to her place. And then I show up at the hospital like a total idiot. They wouldn't even let me into her room. It's a women's ward. And she needs care. Like help washing, changing her diaper, whatever. That's what the nurses told me. And I immediately knew I can't do any of that. So instead of supporting your family, you're doing everything to dump all this on me. Now that was something new. Carmen had never heard Nicholas speak to her in such a shrill, hysterical tone. She took another sip of orange juice, crumpled the empty carton, and tossed it into the trash. She noted that no one had taken out the garbage. If she didn't do it soon, the bag would split. As she went through these mundane routines, she tuned out Nicholas's meltdown. Why are you silent? He suddenly snapped, grabbing her by the shoulders. We need to figure out how to handle this. And instead of rushing home to help me with my mom, you stay late at work and now you're stonewalling me? I didn't just stay late, Carmen said, deciding to rip the bandage off quickly. I also need to tell you that I'm going on a business trip soon. Just for a few days of 5, maybe. A business trip? Nicholas blinked like he'd never heard the term in his life. What kind of trip at a time like this? You need to tell your boss you're not the right person. Let them find someone else. And I suppose someone else should pay to support the two of us too? Carmen turned and looked him straight in the eyes. You think this is a good time to mock me? He hissed. My mother's on her deathbed and you're making jokes? And now you invent some trip? Carmen had to spend some time figuring out exactly what had happened to her beloved second mother. It turned out Isabel had suffered a stroke. I don't know anything, Nicholas muttered, collapsed on the couch in a near faint. The doctors haven't said anything definitive yet. She felt bad, managed to call an ambulance, and I wasn't there. Can you believe that, Carmen? I wasn't there. Carmen barely held back a biting comment. By that logic, Nicholas should always be by his mother's side, and maybe never should have gotten married at all. But what she did gather from his words was clear. Nicholas was placing the entire burden of his mother's care on her. Because she was a woman. And she had no way out. She wouldn't just let a sick person suffer, right? Tell me something, she asked, staring at him. How do you imagine this is going to work? Who's going to feed us while I take care of your mother? Well, then we'll have to tighten our belts, Nicholas snapped, waving his hand like it was no big deal. What's money compared to a person's life? This money, Carmen gestured around the tiny rental apartment, pays for this room, utilities, food. If someone's going to take care of your mom, that person needs resources. And since I'm already working nonstop with no weekends or holidays, I think you, her actual son, should do it. Especially considering how she's treated me all these years, it's a miracle I'm even sitting here talking to you about it. You're petty, manipulative, and greedy, Nicholas spat, rewarding her with a string of insults. When someone's suffering, it's no time to bring up the past. And tell me, what was Mom ever wrong about? You're abandoning me. You're abandoning her at this tragic moment. Carmen simply didn't have the strength to argue with her husband about why she needed to work, so she chose not to fight. Instead, she quickly started making dinner. Nicholas spent the entire evening pacing anxiously and calling the hospital ward repeatedly. After each call, he would immediately report to Carmen whatever the duty nurse had told him, as if she actually cared. A few times Carmen opened her mouth to remind her husband how his mother had always treated her and to ask him not to involve her in Isabel's problems, but each time she lacked the courage to say it. Instead, Nicholas took on a commanding tone and demanded that she pack up some food for him to take to the hospital and get dressed. We're going to visit Mom, he declared while pulling on his jeans. That was something new and unpleasant. Nicholas had never used such an overtly commanding tone before. And when it came to planning and trips, it had always been Carmen who took the lead. Clearly, his mother's illness had shaken him, and he was now trying to step into a role that didn't suit him, mobilizing himself, so to speak. "Nicholas, I'm exhausted," Carmen said in a drained voice. She really couldn't feel her legs after a long workday, and she still needed to prepare for her business trip. "Carmen." Nicholas loomed over her like the wrath of God. "What is this? Sabotage? Why are you doing this to me? Is it so hard for you to drag your lazy ass off the couch and go see a sick person? Nicholas, what difference will it make to your mom if I go?" Carmen tried to de-escalate the conflict diplomatically. "She needs help. Real help," Nicholas shouted at the top of his lungs. "I'm a man. I can't be doing that kind of thing. Mom would be embarrassed. And the staff there told me outright that they're short on nurses and that we need to sort out her care ourselves." Carmen had never seen her husband so distraught, but she had no desire to cater to him. First of all, she had a lot of work. And second, she felt like she was about to collapse and never get up again. "Then hire a caregiver, Nicholas," she said coldly, then turned and walked into the bathroom. At least there, her overly enthusiastic husband couldn't reach her. Still, Nicholas continued his tirade from the hallway, demanding her involvement in caring for his sick mother. He guilted her, invoked duty, begged, threatened, pleaded, all in one breath, one wave after another. "Nicholas, I'm going on that business trip no matter what, and you will have to handle your mother's care," Carmen repeated patiently, as if speaking to a child. "I don't know, pay one of the nurses or attendants to wash your mom. You talk like she's a stranger to you." Nicholas yelled theatrically through the bathroom door, then Carmen heard the front door slam. That meant he'd left. Carmen emerged from her hiding spot to assess the damage. The bag of food she had packed for Isabel was gone, so at least Nicholas hadn't turned his nose up at a home-cooked meal. But she didn't even want to imagine what kind of words he'd used to describe her. For a moment, Carmen wondered if she'd been too harsh with him and his mother. Then she remembered Margarita's advice and realized she'd done exactly the right thing. Nicholas came back later, grim-faced and silent. He ate some cold dumplings and went straight to bed without saying a single word to his wife. Carmen shrugged. He would talk when he was ready. And he did, but not until the next evening. That's when Nicholas essentially gave her an ultimatum: either she took care of his mother, or why even be married? But Carmen was prepared. She and Margarita had spent half the day figuring out how to handle the situation with minimal cost to Carmen. Swallowing her urge to snap back, she calmly proposed the only reasonable option: they would hire a caregiver, and the caregiver would look after Isabel. But those services weren't cheap, and Nicholas would also need to contribute financially, because Carmen couldn't break herself in two just to provide his mother with care. And then it began. Nicholas screamed and wailed that she wasn't the kind of wife he'd wanted, not the soulmate or partner he'd dreamed of, certainly not someone who would abandon a helpless human being. And not just any person, his mother. "You're cold and heartless," he ranted, raining down insults on Carmen. "How could I have ended up with someone like you? Where were my eyes? You're just making up excuses to shirk your womanly duties." "And what duties are those?" Carmen asked calmly. "Taking care of the sick, managing the home, raising the kids, that's a woman's job," Nicholas snapped with conviction. "Perfect. I'm ready," Carmen replied. After her conversation with Margarita, she felt bolder than ever. "But only when you start providing for me and this household. Because, if we're going by old-fashioned roles, that one's entirely on the man. Don't you dare throw my role in my face," Nicholas shouted, clearly unaware of how absurd he sounded. "I'll be ashamed in front of everyone we know if they find out I handed my own mother over to a stranger." "And I'm not a stranger to her?" Carmen asked softly. "Because if you listen to Isabel, I'm the strangest stranger she's ever met." "Oh, stop nitpicking," Nicholas said with a wide, dismissive gesture, as if he wanted to push his wife away. "You're just making up excuses so you don't have to do anything. And you? You're her son. Don't you want to take care of your own mother? Carmen replied, using the arguments Margarita had thoughtfully provided. Why are you refusing to do it? She's your mom. And then no one, no relative or friend, will judge you for it. I'm a man. Nicholas shouted so loudly the window pane shook. Like hell I'm going to mess around with diapers. And we're right back where we started, Carmen sighed. Look, the plan I'm offering is the only option. I can't take care of your mother, period. So you need to get a job to pay for a caregiver. I'll keep working to support our household. Nicholas protested the plan in every way possible, but he couldn't change anything. Carmen stood firm. She even helped him send a resume to the very first job posting they found online, then set about searching for a caregiver. It wasn't easy. First, they were tight on money, so they needed someone who wouldn't ask for too much. On the other hand, Nicholas had such a long list of demands for the caregiver that only someone used to nursing royalty could qualify. Finally, in the days leading up to Carmen's business trip, she managed to reach an understanding with one promising candidate. The woman was 65, not young, but strong and refined. She agreed to visit the hospital and meet her future patient. Hello, my name is Dolores, the woman introduced herself as she entered the hospital room. I'll be taking care of you. Isabel hated her on sight. Right then and there, she threw a massive tantrum in front of her daughter-in-law and son. Who do you think I am? She shrieked at the top of her lungs. You think you can just dump me on some stranger and be done with it? I won't let her touch me. I won't allow it. Son, you must make your wife remember everything I've done for her. Carmen nearly laughed. Right, so many good things Isabel had done for her. So many that she couldn't remember a single one. Sweetheart, there's no need to shout, Dolores said gently as she skillfully adjusted the patient's bed. It's not good for your health to get upset. Let's stay calm, we'll work together wonderfully. Here, let me fluff your pillows. Nicholas, of course, sided completely with his mother. He went ballistic and demanded that Carmen cancel her business trip at any cost and take care of Isabel herself. Nothing seemed capable of breaking through to him. But Carmen, coached by Margarita, responded calmly and evenly so as not to provoke another outburst. With what you'll be earning from this job, we can just afford to pay Dolores, she explained. If you don't like her, you're welcome to find a better paying job, and then we can hire someone else. That trapped Nicholas in a corner. If he managed to earn more, he could choose a different caregiver endlessly if he wanted. But if he stayed in the low-level job he'd quickly snagged, then Dolores was their only option. You have to stop acting up and start doing your duty, he hissed at Carmen. We've already discussed what my duties are, she replied. Carmen was pleasantly surprised to notice a new steel in her voice. And apparently Nicholas noticed it too, because with each passing day, his arguments weakened. She wasn't completely calm as she left for the trip, but her conscience was clear. If Isabel was discharged from the hospital, she'd already arranged for someone to take care of her. And if she wasn't, Dolores would continue caring for her there. Nicholas just had to earn and supervise. There wasn't much for Carmen to do on the business trip. She was excellent at her job and handled her responsibilities almost automatically. For the first time in a long while, she had time for herself. She strolled down autumn streets, crunched leaves underfoot, sipped coffee by a fountain in the park, and watched noisy pigeons fight over a crust of bread. In short, the trip became a rare escape, a rest for both body and soul. So, Margarita teased over the phone, have you tasted the sweet life yet? Maybe it's time to make the right turn, and instead of going back to that rented apartment, head to your parents' place. Carmen, don't waste your life. But Carmen only sighed in response and kept calling Nicholas to hear out his endless complaints. And he had plenty. First, he hated the job he'd been forced to take. Second, his mother was constantly demanding that he force Carmen to take over caregiving and was issuing ultimatums to send Dolores packing. Third, Nicholas had finally come face to face with harsh reality, cooking for himself and cleaning up after himself. That kind of workload was apparently more than he could handle. Gradually, his tone softened, from angry threats and silent treatment to obsequious pleading. He asked Carmen to wrap things up quickly and come home. But she wasn't about to indulge him. If she'd once considered returning a day or two early, she now did the opposite. She persuaded her boss to extend her stay by 4 days. She claimed she was swamped with tasks and, since her travel and lodging were already paid for, she might as well finish everything properly. By the time Carmen stepped through the door of their small apartment, Nicholas seemed ready to do anything. He greeted her enthusiastically and hugged her tighter than he had in years. Carmen smirked inwardly and thought, well, Margarita was right, this trip did everyone a world of good. However, Isabel was in no hurry to turn her wrath into mercy. She was still angry, still snorting derisively at both her daughter-in-law and the caregiver. The only thing she wanted from Carmen was for her to bow her head and take on the care duties herself. Especially now that the doctors had informed everyone Isabel would be discharged tomorrow and would need to be moved home. What caregiver? Isabel shrieked, practically spitting with rage, unbothered even by the presence of the nearby doctor. I have a 2-bedroom apartment. Move out of your rented dump and come live with me. The daughter-in-law went on her little business trip, fine. That means she can take care of me now, that spoiled princess. And you, my son, you break your back at that miserable job for her, and this is how she repays you? Carmen no longer let her mother-in-law's performances get to her. She calmly informed the raging woman that she would continue working as she always had, and that her husband's income was only enough to pay for Dolores's services. That was the arrangement, no alternatives. The next day, Isabel was ceremoniously loaded into a special vehicle for bedridden patients and transported home. Dolores was already waiting there, round, attentive, kind, skilled, and remarkably persistent. She accepted all of Isabel's antics with philosophical calm and reassured Carmen by gently patting her hand like a mother. Life throws all sorts of things at you, sweetheart. This too shall pass. I think your mother-in-law and I will find our rhythm, don't worry. From Carmen's point of view, there was probably more chance of bonding with a rattlesnake, but she wisely kept that opinion to herself. No point souring the atmosphere with this truly remarkable woman, who bore the burdens of her tough job with such quiet strength. Your mother-in-law sure has a nasty temper, Dolores would say whenever she had a spare moment to chat. Forgive me for meddling, but how do you stand her? If that were me, well, my late mother-in-law would have flown across the room by now. And my husband would have stood up for me too, if things had gone like that. It's not right, the way she treats you. Since they shared the same problem, Isabel, they decided to face it as a team. It was easier that way. Carmen wasn't close to her own mother. She had 3 children from a second marriage and little time for Carmen, so strangely, she found a connection with Dolores instead. This simple woman, with her straightforward views, gentle speech, and warm hands, had completely won Carmen over. Your husband's a bit of a brute, too, Dolores sometimes sighed after her shift, when Carmen stopped by with fresh linens and a warm meal. You don't treat your wife like that. A woman needs kindness, care. Especially when I see how much you're doing for your mother-in-law. Where the hell is that wretch? Came a sharp cry from the next room. You'd be late to your own funeral. Get in here, I said. Who do you think that was meant for? Carmen asked aloud, and she and Dolores exchanged a conspiratorial glance. This time, I think it's you, the older woman replied. Though half an hour before you showed up, she was yelling the same at me. But don't worry, Carmen, I'm doing everything right. She's clean, cared for, fed, medicated, and her shots are given on time. She's just a very difficult person. I know, Dolores, I know, Carmen said, feeling an odd urge to comfort her caregiver. She rested her hand gently on Dolores's soft, doughy palm. I've been living with it for years. I feel it in my own skin. Sighing, Carmen went to answer Isabel's summons, while Dolores watched her go with a sad expression. Isabel was dissatisfied with everything, that Carmen didn't rush to her bedside and only visited in the evenings, that she'd worn out her husband to the point of collapse by making him work, that the caregiver was the worst of the worst. You always try to save money on me," Isabel wailed, wringing her hands. "If you'd hired a proper caregiver, I'd be walking by now. And anyway, the hospital said I should be doing rehab in a sanatorium." "We checked on the sanatorium," Carmen said, keeping her tone even. "It costs as much as your son earns in 6 months. And we're already spending on Dolores' services, so for now, the sanatorium is off the table. Unless you're willing to chip in from your sick leave payments or pension, then we'll gladly split the cost and buy you a spot." "Oh yeah? You want this?" Isabel curled her fingers into a huge, exaggerated fig sign and shoved it right under Carmen's nose. "Here's my money. Here's my savings. My sick leave, you leech. You're trying to rob me, are you?" Before Carmen could even respond, remind her, perhaps, that she was literally planning to use that money to pay for Isabel's own rehabilitation, the older woman suddenly tensed and started screaming. "Police! Caregiver, what's your name again? Call the police! They're trying to rob me! Help! Help! They're killing me!" Even though it was autumn, Isabel's windows were wide open, and she was screaming loud enough for the entire street to hear. Carmen braced herself to explain everything to the approaching Dolores, but the caregiver had her own way of handling things. With practiced calm, Dolores walked over, placed her warm, soft hand on Isabel's forehead, and began speaking gently, slowly, like someone taming a feral animal. "No need for rash accusations. Everything's fine. No one is taking anything from her. Her money is her own. Don't worry," Dolores soothed. "Carmen's a good one. Look how kind she is. Look how she found me for you and brings food every day. Good? You call her good?" Isabel continued her tirade. "If she were married to your son, you wouldn't think she was good. She's trash, not a daughter-in-law. She torments my boy. She forced him out to work while she sits around without a care, stashing her money under the mattress. And this is what they call a happy marriage? I told Nicholas 1,000 times to leave that monkey and find himself a proper woman. I even introduced him to some. Oh yes, don't look at me like that, Carmen. When you have kids, you'll understand. I brought him nice girls. Friends of mine have daughters, lovely, well-mannered, beautiful girls. And what does he do? Hooks up with this plucked chicken. I have a son, Dolores responded calmly. He's nothing special, just a quiet, steady boy. Came to me late in life. My daughter is much older than him. The conversation seemed to distract Isabel and steer her away from screaming about being robbed. And your son? Isabel asked, now speaking informally to the caregiver. Has he found himself a proper woman? Not yet, Dolores replied carefully, already busying herself with Isabel's medication. But he's looking, as far as I know. He's a good guy, just hasn't had much luck. Works at a factory, earns a modest living, and barely has time to date. Still waiting to find the one. Well, let him keep waiting, Isabel sneered. At least he hasn't saddled himself with some freeloader who does nothing all day. Carmen exchanged a glance with Dolores and left the room. It was pointless trying to explain anything to her mother-in-law. But how skillfully Dolores managed to handle that tempestuous woman. In the caregiver's presence, Isabel became noticeably calmer and more reasonable. Carmen silently thanked fate for having brought such a woman into her life. The prognosis for Isabel's rehabilitation was cautious. With joint effort, they had managed to regain some mobility in both arms, though her left was still very weak. Her speech was as sharp as ever, as the stroke hadn't affected that part of her brain. But walking, or even sitting up independently, was a much bigger challenge. Isabel constantly grumbled and demanded that Carmen and Nicholas take charge of her recovery. She brought up all sorts of outlandish treatments and famous specialists who, she claimed, could have had her back on her feet in no time. If only her daughter-in-law wasn't so greedy and invested her millions into her second mother. Nicholas, who had once been fairly grounded in reality, had now begun to suspect that his wife was hiding a significant portion of her earnings to avoid paying for his mother's care. That day, Carmen got home earlier than usual. Work let everyone out because of sewer maintenance. As luck would have it, Nicholas also came home unexpectedly, saw Carmen, and launched into a fit of rage, accusing her of skipping work just to earn less. "You just want to torment her," he muttered darkly, collapsing onto the couch. "If you wanted to, you'd have already found the money and we'd have flown her to China for acupuncture. I heard they cure that stuff over there." "I also heard people milk chickens in villages," Carmen replied automatically. "Nicholas, if you think I'm a secret millionaire, you're way off. My entire salary goes to food and rent. Meanwhile, your mother is hoarding all her money. She could have bought herself the rehab package. Enough with the digs at my mom." Nicholas flared up. "All I hear from you is poison about a sick woman. Aren't you ashamed of yourself? First you steal from your own family, and now you're verbally abusing her. Nicholas, are you sure you're not confusing who's actually doing the abusing here?" Carmen looked at him wide-eyed and realized that there was nothing left between them. They were strangers now, so much so that she'd prefer to be alone with any random man on the street than spend one more evening with Nicholas. "No, I'm not confused," he ranted. "You shoved me into this awful job that leaves my whole body in pain, and now you're slandering her. And that caregiver you hired? She's shady. Probably drugging her food or giving her sleeping pills, maybe worse, to get rid of her faster. I went to see Mom earlier, and your precious Dolores told me her shift was over and just left. Can you imagine? I had to feed my own mother's soup myself. With a spoon. Am I a caregiver now? What kind of person did you hire and let into our home? Why would we trust someone like that with something this important?" "Find your own caregiver," Carmen shrugged. "Just make sure you convince someone to work for the peanuts you're earning." "What, can't do it?" Carmen had always tried to stay calm when speaking with her husband, but she couldn't anymore. The day before, his mother had thrown a massive tantrum at her in front of Dolores. The poor woman had barely managed to calm her down. And now Nicholas was sulking, finding fault with everything. "How long do I have to keep breaking my back for your whole damn family?" Carmen's head was pounding. "You've worn me out completely. And your constant insults on top of that." Nicholas stared at her, stunned. He didn't recognize this woman. Carmen suddenly grabbed her purse from the hook in the hallway, slipped into her sneakers, and within 5 minutes was running down the stairs, skipping the elevator. She just needed to move, needed distance. If she didn't get out now, she was afraid she might actually slap Nicholas across the face. After walking briskly for half a block, Carmen calmed down. She tried calling Margarita, just to talk, to share her frustrations, to ask for advice, but the phone rang and rang with no answer. Then she remembered her cousin was on vacation and had likely flown off somewhere warm with her husband. That stung, but it wasn't the end of the world. The young woman walked slowly down the street, trying to breathe deeply and simply enjoying the fact of being out for a walk. Rain clouds were gathering overhead, but Carmen's mood matched the wildness of the weather. "Carmen. Carmencita," someone called from behind, and the young woman turned her head, trying to figure out who it was. A moment later, there stood the round, cheerful Dolores, the very same woman who had been the topic of conversation not long ago. "I just popped into the pastry shop," she announced. "Mateo and I live nearby, and in the evenings they sell these absolutely divine eclairs. So fresh, so light and airy." Dolores praised the eclairs so enthusiastically, their sweet scent wafting from the paper bag in her hands, that Carmen couldn't help but smile. What kind of magic did this wonderful woman possess that she could affect her so effortlessly? Sensing Carmen's mood, Dolores gently took her by the elbow and suggested, "Come with me, Carmencita. Let's sit, have some tea. Mateo's always buried in his work and doesn't lift his head from his papers. It'll be good for him to talk to someone else for once, someone alive besides me. I mean, it's always me, he needs a break from that." Carmen was a little surprised. She remembered Dolores saying her son worked in a factory. She doubted factory workers spent their evenings poring over documents. But if her warm-hearted hostess insisted, why not? Besides, Carmen had nowhere else to go. The thought of returning home to Nicholas and hearing yet another lecture about what a terrible wife she was, no, absolutely not. Her feet simply refused to carry her in that direction. And so, for the first time, Carmen visited Dolores's home. The kind woman lived modestly, but the place was cozy and full of warmth. It wasn't the designer kind of comfort built on expensive purchases like Isabel's apartment. This was true homey coziness, authentic, heartfelt. Just as Carmen had imagined her savior's home would be. That's what she privately called Dolores, because if this amazing woman hadn't agreed to work for the little that Nicholas earned, they wouldn't have been able to care for Isabel at all. While Dolores unpacked the eclairs and bustled around the kettle, a tall man entered the kitchen, Mateo himself, whom Carmen had heard so much about. He turned out to be over 2 meters tall. Sitting side by side at the table was a bit awkward, but the warmth and ease of the conversation smoothed it over. Over tea, Dolores shared a lot about herself, how she had ended up working as a caregiver. She said she needed to be around people, to help them, and that she had more than 40 years of experience in medicine. I started as a floor nurse, then a procedure nurse, and eventually became the head nurse in the surgical ward, she said proudly. But then a new broom swept in at the hospital, new management, and they kicked all the pensioners out. But me? I still have strength. Why sit around at home? So I decided to post an ad online. Thought maybe someone might need help. So many patients I'd seen over the years who needed care when family had jobs or when there was no one at all. And then you called, Carmencita. And I have to say, I haven't had such a wonderful employer in a long time. Well, the patient isn't exactly wonderful, Carmen ventured, sipping her hot, fragrant tea. To be honest, I just ran out of the house. I've had enough of all of it. Honesty for honesty, Carmen began telling Dolores how hard her life had become. How much Nicholas demanded of her, how Isabel treated her, how exhausted she was from carrying her husband and the household on her shoulders, especially when he had been unemployed for so long. You know, I just want simple womanly happiness, she concluded. When I got married, I dreamed of having a baby, raising a child, greeting my husband after work with homemade meals. But instead, I'm working double shifts just to afford rent and groceries. Dolores nodded sympathetically, patting her hand gently. She kept repeating, "This too shall pass, darling. It'll all pass." I tell Mateo, I tell my daughter Elena, never lose hope, never give up. You're young and strong. You'll be okay. Just decide what it is you want. Easy to say, decide. But what if Carmen didn't know how she wanted to live? Sometimes her instincts screamed, run from Nicholas and never come back. Forget his number and erase every trace of him from your life. But other times she felt such deep, aching loneliness that it made her want to howl. Dolores must have sensed the inner torment her guest was experiencing because she didn't say anything more. She simply poured more amber tea into Carmen's empty cup and went on chatting about light, unimportant things. That evening, Mateo walked Carmen home. Of course, she tried to protest, saying if he was busy with paperwork, he shouldn't be disturbed. But Mateo smiled kindly, put on his shoes, and stepped into the hallway with her. No numbers or calculations are more important than keeping a beautiful woman safe. The tone of Mateo's voice stirred something unfamiliar in Carmen's chest, a strange, fluttering sensation. They decided not to take the bus but to walk instead. It would take only about 30 minutes to reach the building where Carmen and Nicholas rented their apartment. And the whole way, they talked. About Mateo's work. About how he wanted to optimize machine labor in his factory workshop. About how he earned a decent wage and planned to study at university part-time. Years ago, when he was young, his father had passed away, and that had kept him from pursuing higher education right away. She and Mateo talked so naturally, as if they were old friends. And Carmen didn't want to part with him when her apartment building came into view. The next day, when she met Dolores at the home of the fussy and restless Isabel, Carmen no longer saw her as just a caregiver, but as a kind friend. Dolores, in turn, beamed with happiness and smiled warmly at her. When Isabel was distracted watching TV in her room, still muttering bitter comments about her daughter-in-law and the caregiver, Carmen pulled Dolores aside into the kitchen and handed her a folder. "I found something at the office that might help Mateo with his calculations. I got it from our engineers. Please give it to him, with my best wishes." That kind of dedication is something to admire. But Dolores didn't take the folder. She looked at the papers neatly arranged in plastic sleeves, then raised her eyes to Carmen. "How about you give it to him yourself, sweetheart?" she said softly. "I won't be home anytime soon today. And there's no need for you to hang around here. Go home, freshen up, rest a little. Then if you want, I'll send you Mateo's number. Just call him." For some reason, Carmen didn't take these words as a suggestion, but as instructions. After only a brief hesitation, she nodded and accepted the proposal. She met Mateo that evening, just as the long shadows gave way to dusk. It felt wonderful to walk through the city bathed in the golden glow of street lamps, chatting about personal things, work, and anything else that came to mind. With Mateo, Carmen didn't feel inadequate or out of place. She didn't worry about how she sounded, how she laughed, or how straight her back was. All the things her husband often criticized about her were the very things that delighted Mateo. He suggested going to a small park. "No point just wandering the street like teenagers, right? Let's go over there. They have benches. We can sit down and take a closer look at this treasure you brought me." Half an hour later, Mateo was overflowing with gratitude. "I have to invite you for coffee," he said, his gray eyes framed by thick black lashes gazing into hers. "Please, don't deny me this pleasure." Just a few days earlier, Carmen would have politely declined, said she was married, and returned home to perpetually displeased Nicholas. But now she simply nodded and followed Mateo. From that moment on, they began seeing each other. At first, in secret, under the cover of night, which made it all the more thrilling. Dolores, it seemed, either knew or strongly suspected what was happening, because she and Carmen exchanged many meaningful glances. The older woman often nudged her to leave Isabel early and not to rush home right away. "You're a good girl, kind, hard-working, considerate," she'd say. "You've got no business staying in that viper's nest. You know, it's not my habit to discuss patients' private matters with their relatives, but on the phone, your Isabel says the most awful things about you. And the way she talks to Nicholas, her own son, it's outrageous. She never has a kind word for you. She just keeps trying to turn him against you, to control you. I was married for 40 happy years and never suffered even a fraction of what you're going through. So think it over, I won't tell you what to do." And Carmen did think it over. One day, she simply packed her things, asked for a day off from work, and left their rented apartment while Nicholas was still at work. Around the same time, Dolores informed Isabel that she was quitting. It happened after yet another tirade from the perpetually unhappy patient. Isabel hurled curses and promised to raise her pay if she stayed, but Dolores politely declined. "My son is getting married," she said calmly. "He's met a wonderful girl. She's hardworking, modest, never talks back. Keeps the house perfectly. They haven't known each other long, but I think she's the one. That rare spark, something worth protecting." "Well, lucky them." Isabel snapped, unable to hold back. "Some men manage to find decent wives, sweet ones who do everything around the house. And I get stuck with a monster for a daughter-in-law. Can't imagine where Nicholas even found her. You're a sneaky one, Dolores, leaving me at a time like this." "My son is getting married," Dolores repeated calmly. "There'll be grandkids soon. Mateo's independent now, owns his own place. Bought a small flat on a mortgage years ago, rented it out, and now it's fully paid off. So I'll stay home now, waiting for my kids to make me a grandmother." With that, she fluffed Isabel's pillows one last time, said a polite goodbye, and left. The only thing Carmen and her new mother-in-law, Dolores, regretted during their long, friendly kitchen chats on weekends was that they never got to see the faces of Nicholas and Isabel when they realized Carmen had found the strength to leave. They must hate the new setup, Dolores concluded. That Nicholas has been blowing up my phone. I don't even know what to do anymore. He's sobbing about how his horrible wife abandoned him and took everything. Now he has to pay rent on his own, refuses to live with his mother, and even has to cook for himself. And get this, he actually had the nerve to ask me to work for them for free for a couple of weeks. Said I already earned plenty from them and should now return the favor. He must have truly lost it from desperation. Modesty was never his strong suit. Carmen picked up another Air Eclair from the saucer, bit into it, savored the buttery cream, and smiled. Now, at last, her life was beginning to go in the right direction.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.